Picture this, you're on a first date, and the conversation takes a sudden turn. Your date starts venting about their ex in vivid detail, their voice sharp with resentment. But instead of nodding along or joining in, you catch yourself observing not just their words, but the emotion behind them, the lack of self-awareness. That's the Stoic difference. While most people get swept up in the drama, a man grounded in Stoicism sees these moments with startling clarity. It's not about being cold or detached. It's about recognizing patterns that others miss because you've trained yourself to look beyond the surface. And that's where red flags reveal themselves not as glaring warnings, but as quiet inconsistencies in character, subtle cracks in someone's emotional foundation. Stoicism teaches men to navigate relationships with a rare combination of empathy and discernment. Imagine having the ability to spot dysfunction early, not because you're cynical, but because you've studied human nature like a philosopher. You notice when someone plays the victim instead of taking responsibility, or when charm feels performative rather than genuine. These aren't just hunches, they're the result of a mindset that values wisdom over impulse, truth over comfort. And that's why today's topic matters. We're diving deep into the 25 dating red flags Stoic men recognize almost instinctively, the kind that save you from heartache down the road. What makes these red flags different? They're not about petty preferences or superficial deal breakers. They're rooted in timeless principles: self-discipline, integrity, emotional maturity, qualities Stoics hold in high regard. When a man practices Stoicism, he develops a radar for imbalance, the person who demands loyalty but avoids accountability, the one who thrives on chaos but calls it passion. These are the contradictions that signal deeper issues, and here's the thing, you don't need to be a Stoic scholar to benefit from this lens. By the end of this video, you'll see relationships through a sharper, clearer frame. One that helps you choose partners who align with your values, not just your emotions. So let's begin. The first red flag Stoic men recognize isn't about what someone says, it's about what they can't articulate. You'll notice it when emotions run high, and instead of pausing to reflect, your date reacts impulsively, oblivious to the storm inside them. Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher-emperor, wrote that true strength lies in examining oneself daily, in understanding the roots of anger, fear, or desire. A partner who lacks this self-awareness isn't just emotionally messy, they're disconnected from the very core of what Stoics consider wisdom. Picture someone who snaps over a minor inconvenience, then brushes it off with, "I'm just stressed," never digging deeper. That's not stress, it's a refusal to confront what's really driving them. Stoicism doesn't demand perfection, but it prizes honesty, especially with oneself. A Stoic man listens closely when a date describes past conflicts. Does she take ownership of her role, or does every story paint her as the blameless victim? Emotional self-awareness isn't about being calm all the time. It's about recognizing patterns, like realizing jealousy stems from insecurity, not love. Without that clarity, relationships become minefields. You'll tiptoe around outbursts, make excuses for their moods, and worst of all, you'll enable their avoidance of growth. Here's the subtle distinction Stoics grasp. A person who can't name their emotions can't master them. And if they can't master themselves, how can they ever show up fully for someone else? Now let's talk about the second red flag, one that Stoic men spot almost instantly: the chronic victim mentality. Picture someone who sees every setback as a personal injustice, every disagreement as a betrayal, and every failure as proof that the world is against them. Stoicism at its core is about radical accountability. Epictetus, the former slave-turned-philosopher, put it bluntly, "It's not what happens to you, but how you respond that matters." Someone stuck in victim mode isn't just pessimistic, they're refusing the fundamental Stoic practice of distinguishing between what's within their control and what isn't. Here's how it plays out in dating. You might hear phrases like, "My ex ruined my trust," or "No one gives me a chance," with zero acknowledgement of their own role in those patterns. A Stoic man listens for the absence of agency. He notices when complaints replace solutions, when blame overshadows reflection. Because while life isn't fair, Stoicism teaches that our power lies in how we navigate that unfairness. A partner who externalizes every problem is essentially handing their happiness to circumstance, and that's a recipe for resentment. But here's the nuance: victimhood isn't the same as vulnerability. Sharing past pain is healthy, using it as an excuse to avoid growth is not. Epictetus warned against confusing the two when he said, "Circumstances don't make the man, they reveal him." A Stoic doesn't dismiss someone's struggles, but they do pay attention to whether those struggles become an identity. Dating someone who clings to victimhood means signing up for a relationship where responsibility is always one-sided. You'll become the eternal fixer, the emotional crutch roles that drain intimacy of its balance. The Stoic alternative: look for someone who meets adversity with what Marcus Aurelius called the art of acquiescence. Not passive surrender, but a willingness to adapt, learn, and own their part. That's the difference between a partner who grows with you and one who stays stuck in the same story, waiting for the world to change first. The third red flag cuts deeper than most realize: disrespect for boundaries. A Stoic man understands that true respect isn't just about kindness. It's about honoring someone's autonomy, their right to say no without explanation. Seneca's letters echo this principle. Let us cherish and love virtue. It is not enough to possess her if we do not share her. Mutual respect isn't negotiable. It's the foundation of any healthy connection. But here's where modern dating often stumbles: boundary violations disguised as passion or persistence. Imagine a date who playfully pushes you to drink more after you've declined, or texts incessantly when you've asked for space. These aren't signs of devotion, they're subtle power plays, a disregard for your sovereignty. Stoicism teaches that self-ownership is sacred. When someone tramples your boundaries, they're not just being thoughtless, they're revealing a fundamental lack of reverence for your agency. The Stoic lens exposes these moments with brutal clarity. A person who ignores your limits, whether emotional, physical, or temporal, is essentially saying, "My desires outweigh your comfort." That's not love, it's coercion in slow motion. Seneca warned against such imbalances in his dialogues, urging us to avoid relationships where one voice dominates. A partner who respects you will pause when you say enough, not see it as a challenge to overcome. And here's the critical distinction: boundaries aren't walls. They're the framework for trust. A Stoic doesn't build fortresses around his heart, but he does mark where the drawbridge lies and watches carefully who respects the line. When someone crosses it, whether by demanding access to your phone or dismissing your need for solitude, they're not just breaking a rule, they're failing a test of character. The irony: many people mistake boundary violations for intimacy. They confuse possessiveness with care, intrusion with connection. But Stoicism separates the two with surgical precision. Emotional health isn't about merging until you lose yourself. It's about standing firm in your own space while choosing to walk alongside another. So pay attention to the small trespasses, the jokes at your expense after you've asked them to stop, the guilt trips when you prioritize your needs. These aren't accidents, they're rehearsals for bigger violations. A Stoic man walks away not out of pride, but because he knows this truth: anyone who resists respecting your boundaries will eventually resist respecting you. The fourth red flag might seem obvious at first glance: materialism, but Stoic men recognize its subtler, more corrosive forms. Musonius Rufus, the philosopher who taught Epictetus, dismissed luxury as not just unnecessary but harmful. One who craves riches feels poor no matter how much they possess. A Stoic isn't opposed to comfort, but they're wary of anyone who measures worth by what can be bought. You'll spot this early when conversations circle back to labels, salaries, or social clout, not as passing observations, but as benchmarks for respect. Here's where modern dating gets tricky. Materialism isn't always loud, sometimes it whispers. It's not just the flashy displays of wealth, but the quiet disdain for simplicity. Picture someone who scoffs at your thrift store find, or jokes about your modest apartment while dropping hints about their ex's penthouse. These aren't harmless preferences, they're valued judgments. Stoicism trains men to see through this fixation on externals, because chasing status is like building on sand. No amount of admiration for your car, your watch, or your connections will ever translate into genuine respect for who you are. Musonius Rufus went further, arguing that luxury weakens character. In relationships, this plays out in startling ways. A partner who expects expensive gifts or lavish dates isn't just high maintenance, they're conditioning the relationship on factors outside your control. What happens if you lose your job or choose a career that prioritizes purpose over profit? A Stoic knows that love rooted in material security is transactional, not transformative. But here's the nuance: appreciating beauty or quality isn't the issue. The red flag emerges when those things become non-negotiable, when admiration shifts from who you are to what you provide. The ancient Stoics warned against preferred indifference, things like wealth or comfort that might be nice to have but are ultimately irrelevant to virtue. Dating someone who reverses that hierarchy, who treats externals as essential, means signing up for a love that's forever contingent. You'll feel the pressure to perform, to keep up appearances, rather than being valued for your integrity or compassion. And here's the irony: materialistic partners often mistake their cravings for ambition. Stoicism draws a sharp line between the two. Ambition builds, materialism accumulates. One seeks to contribute, the other to consume. A Stoic man listens for this distinction when a date brags about their designer wardrobe versus their creative projects, or when they name drop not to share insights but to impress. These aren't just social faux pas, they're windows into priorities. The antidote: look for someone who understands, as Seneca wrote, that the wise man is content with himself. That doesn't mean rejecting success, but recognizing that the best relationships are built on shared values, not shared closets. When you find someone indifferent to externals, not in a dismissive way, but in a way that reflects deeper security, you've found someone who can love you, not your utility. Anger that flares up at the slightest provocation isn't passion, it's fragility in disguise. This fifth red flag, the inability to handle conflict calmly, reveals something deeper than a bad temper. Stoicism regards self-control as the cornerstone of virtue, and Marcus Aurelius' private journals are filled with reminders to meet anger with stillness. He wasn't advocating suppression, he was outlining a discipline, the art of holding space between stimulus and response. Picture a date who snaps at the waiter over a delayed order or rolls their eyes when you disagree. These aren't isolated moments, they're stress tests for character, and how someone handles minor friction predicts how they'll weather real storms. Explosive reactions betray a fundamental misunderstanding of power. The ancient Stoics likened uncontrolled anger to a charioteer losing grip of the reins. You might feel in command as you rage, but you're actually at the mercy of the horses. Modern psychology echoes this. Emotional dysregulation isn't strength, it's surrender. A partner who erupts when challenged, who weaponizes sarcasm or the silent treatment, isn't just bad at arguing, they're outsourcing their peace to external events. That's the opposite of Stoic resilience, but here's what most miss: conflict avoidance can be just as telling as conflict explosions. Stoicism doesn't preach passivity, it prizes courageous dialogue. Notice when someone shuts down difficult conversations with "let's just drop it," or resorts to passive-aggressive jabs instead of honest discussion. Both extremes, volcanic anger and emotional withdrawal, stem from the same root: an unwillingness to sit with discomfort. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." A partner who hasn't grasped this will treat every disagreement as a threat rather than an opportunity. They'll keep score, nurse grudges, or worse, expect you to manage their emotions for them. The Stoic alternative: look for someone who engages conflict like a philosopher, listening fully, responding deliberately, and distinguishing between the person and the problem. Watch for the subtle signs early. Does their voice tighten when you correct a fact? Do they interrupt to win rather than understand? These micro-reactions reveal more than any grand gesture ever could. Because in the end, love isn't tested in the easy moments, it's forged in the friction. And a Stoic knows the way someone argues tells you everything about how they'll love. There's a quiet violence in dishonesty, not just the bold deceptions, but the small fractures of truth we justify as harmless. Stoicism doesn't deal in shades of gray when it comes to integrity. Epictetus, who lived his philosophy as a former slave, put it bluntly: "If you want to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid with regard to external things." That's the Stoic litmus test for truthfulness. Are you willing to seem imperfect, inconvenient, or even unimpressive if it means staying aligned with reality? Watch how someone handles this in dating. The red flag isn't always a glaring lie, it's the subtle reshaping of facts to appear more appealing. Maybe they exaggerate their job title just a little, or omit an ex they're still entangled with to avoid drama. These aren't victimless edits, they're rehearsals for deeper betrayals. Consider how Epictetus framed authenticity. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. A partner who claims to value honesty but finesses the truth is like a chef who praises fresh ingredients while serving reheated leftovers. The dissonance compounds over time. You'll catch inconsistencies in their stories. Notice how their funny anecdotes change details with each retelling. Stoics recognize these patterns early because they study human nature like a science. They know that trust, once fractured, becomes a cracked foundation, something you can patch but never fully restore. Here's where modern dating gets slippery. We've normalized white lies as social lubricant. "I'll call you," when they have no intention, or "I'm busy," instead of "I'm not interested." But Stoicism draws a hard line. Every untruth, no matter how small, is a vote against your own character. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul dyes itself with the color of its thoughts and actions. Lie by omission and you're staining your integrity, one compromise at a time. The real cost: a relationship built on partial truths is like a house built on sand. You might not see the erosion until the first storm hits, until you discover the debt they hid, the addiction they minimized, or the emotional unavailability they masked as just being cautious. A Stoic doesn't wait for those revelations. They listen for the gaps between words, the too polished stories, the defensiveness when questioned. Because as Seneca warned his friend Lucilius, "He who is cruel to the truth is cruel to the future." Dishonesty isn't always malicious, sometimes it's fear wearing a disguise. Someone afraid of rejection might embellish their accomplishments. Someone ashamed of their past might omit crucial chapters. But Stoicism teaches that fear confronted is freedom gained. A partner who can't bear the weight of their own truth will eventually ask you to carry the weight of their lies. And that's the ultimate test. Do they choose the discomfort of honesty over the temporary comfort of deception? The antidote: look for someone who speaks plainly, even when it's unflattering. Who admits mistakes without spin, who says, "I don't know," instead of fabricating an answer. These aren't just traits of a good partner, they're marks of a person committed to living authentically. As Epictetus said, first say to yourself what you would be, and then do what you have to do. A Stoic man doesn't just seek truth in others, he demands it of himself. Because in the end, love built on anything less is just shared fiction. A life without purpose isn't just unfulfilling, it's a slow surrender to mediocrity, and Stoic men recognize this as one of the most insidious red flags. Seneca's piercing words on the shortness of life cut straight to the heart of it. It is not that we have a short time to live, but that we waste much of it. He wasn't just lamenting laziness, he was exposing the danger of drifting through days without intention. Picture dating someone whose ambitions begin and end with scrolling through feeds or chasing weekend distractions. At first, their easygoing nature might seem attractive, no pressure, no demands, but dig deeper and you'll find a void where direction should be. Stoicism doesn't demand grand achievements, but it does require engagement with life. A partner who floats passively from one pleasure to the next isn't just laid back. They're avoiding the fundamental human responsibility to contribute, to grow, to mean something. Purpose isn't about career titles or bank accounts. It's about the quiet discipline of choosing meaning over mindless consumption. Seneca warned against mistaking activity for progress. Being busy does not always mean real work. The red flag here isn't unemployment or unconventional paths, it's the absence of intentionality. You'll hear it in conversations that lack curiosity, in goals that never move beyond vague fantasies. "I'll figure it out someday" becomes code for perpetual delay. The Stoic question is simple: if someone can't define what gives their life weight, how can they possibly add depth to yours? This isn't about judging hobbies or downtime. Even the Stoics valued leisure, but as Cicero, who studied their teachings, clarified, otium cum dignitate, leisure with dignity. The difference lies in awareness. A partner who spends hours gaming or binge watching with purpose, to unwind, to connect with friends, to appreciate storytelling, is worlds apart from one who does so to numb existential discomfort. The first understands balance, the second is fleeing from themselves. The greatest risk of dating someone aimless isn't their lack of ambition, it's their gravitational pull. Seneca observed that idleness is contagious, writing, "To be everywhere is to be nowhere." A relationship without shared purpose devolves into mutual stagnation. You'll adapt to their low standards, suppressing your own drive to avoid friction. Worse, you'll become their accidental purpose as they latch onto your goals as substitutes for their own. That's not partnership, it's emotional freeloading. The Stoic alternative: seek someone whose life hums with quiet intention. Maybe they're a barrister studying philosophy, a mechanic who volunteers teaching kids, or an artist content with small galleries but relentless in their craft. What matters isn't scale, it's the why behind their choices. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good person should be one." A partner living that truth won't dazzle you with grand plans, but they'll show up each day with something rare, the quiet dignity of a life in motion. Time isn't just a measurement, it's the one resource you can never replenish. A Stoic man knows this with bone-deep clarity, which is why chronic lateness isn't just an annoyance to him, it's a flashing red light signaling deeper dysfunction. Zeno, the founder of Stoicism, carved discipline into the philosophy's core, teaching that order in small things reflects order in character. Picture someone who strolls in 20 minutes late to dinner, shrugging it off with "traffic was crazy," yet never leaves earlier to compensate. That's not bad luck, it's bad philosophy. When someone treats your time as disposable, they're revealing their relationship with responsibility itself. The ancient Stoics saw time as the raw material of virtue. Seneca wrote that life is long enough if used well, but most people squander it through carelessness and neglect. In dating, this plays out in subtle betrayals. The partner who cancels plans last minute because something came up repeatedly. The one who keeps you waiting while they finish a phone call, as if your presence were a placeholder. These aren't just logistical hiccups, they're microaggressions against mutual respect. A Stoic watches for this disregard because he understands how someone handles minutes reflects how they'll handle commitments. Here's where modern dating misses the mark. We've normalized flakiness as being chill, treating punctuality like an archaic custom rather than a covenant. But Stoicism draws a line. Casual disrespect for time is casual disrespect for people. Marcus Aurelius structured his days with military precision, not because he was rigid, but because he revered the gift of existence. When someone chronically wastes your time, they're not just being disorganized, they're silently declaring their needs matter more than yours. The deeper irony. Time blindness often masks arrogance. Epictetus taught that true freedom lies in aligning actions with nature's rhythms, sunrise, seasons, the inevitable march of years. A person who floats through schedules as if deadlines bend to their whims isn't just scattered, they're resisting reality itself. And that's the ultimate red flag. Someone who won't submit to the clock won't submit to accountability in bigger ways either. Watch for the patterns. Do they text last-minute delays every single date? Do they laugh off their tardiness as just how they are, expecting you to adapt? Stoicism doesn't demand perfection, it demands awareness. A partner truly grounded in these principles might occasionally misjudge traffic, but they'll apologize sincerely, adjust habits, and honor the lesson. That's the difference between a flaw and a philosophy. One is accidental, the other is ingrained. Zeno's students practiced meticulous time management not as a productivity hack, but as reverence for life's finitude. In relationships, this translates to a simple litmus test. Does your date treat your hours as precious or expendable? Because in the end, love isn't just shared moments, it's the mutual acknowledgement that every second counts. Emotional manipulation wears many masks, some velvet, others iron, but each distorts the same truth. Love shouldn't come with strings attached. Stoicism, with its razor-sharp focus on voluntary virtue, sees coercion as the antithesis of genuine connection. Picture someone who says, if you really cared, you'd cancel your plans, or withdraws affection when you disagree. These aren't expressions of need, they're power plays disguised as vulnerability. Marcus Aurelius warned against such tactics in his Meditations, urging, "Let every action aim solely at the common good." Manipulation does the opposite. It sacrifices mutual respect for control, trading trust for tactical wins. Guilt-tripping, the silent treatment, backhanded compliments, these are the tools of emotional alchemy, turning healthy boundaries into perceived betrayals. A Stoic recognizes them instantly, not because he's paranoid, but because he's studied human nature. Epictetus, who endured slavery before becoming a philosopher, wrote that freedom lies in distinguishing what's yours to govern from what isn't. Manipulators invert this principle, holding others hostage for their unresolved pain. When a partner says, "You're just like my ex," after a minor disagreement, they're not sharing a fear, they're installing a guilt trip. Contrast this with Marcus Aurelius' approach to conflict. Speak plainly without malice. Stoic communication isn't about suppressing emotions, it's about expressing them without weaponry. Imagine two ways to voice disappointment. "I felt overlooked when you didn't call," versus "Nice of you to finally remember I exist." The first fosters dialogue, the second punishes under the guise of honesty. A Stoic values clarity precisely because it leaves no room for emotional ambushes. The most insidious manipulations are the ones cloaked in concern. "I'm only saying this because I love you," precedes 1,000 cuts to self-esteem. Seneca cautioned against such friendly fire in his letters. Flattery is the worst enemy of friendship. A partner who constantly frames demands as helpful advice or critiques as just being honest hasn't mastered candor, they've refined coercion. The Stoic alternative: look for someone whose words align with their intentions, who doesn't use intimacy as leverage. Here's the litmus test: does conflict bring you closer or leave you walking on eggshells? Manipulation thrives in ambiguity, in unspoken rules that shift without warning. Stoicism, with its emphasis on integrity, craves transparency instead. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. A partner who stains interactions with guilt or withdrawal isn't just bad at communicating, they're revealing how little they value your autonomy. And that's the red flag no amount of charm can disguise. Growth isn't just a preference for the Stoic-minded, it's non-negotiable. Imagine dating someone who dismisses feedback with "this is just who I am," as if identity were carved in stone rather than shaped by choice. Epictetus, who transformed from a slave to one of history's most revered philosophers, framed his teachings as a hospital for the soul, a place not for the already perfected, but for those willing to confront their wounds and heal. A partner who resists growth isn't just stubborn, they're rejecting the very essence of what makes relationships meaningful. Stoicism sees potential as a verb, not a noun. When someone clings to their flaws like badges of authenticity, they're not being true to themselves, they're being untrue to the person they could become. The red flag here isn't imperfection, it's indifference. Picture someone who laughs off their short temper as just how they're wired, or brushes aside your concerns with "take it or leave it." Epictetus warned that the unexamined life is like walking blindfolded. You'll keep tripping over the same obstacles, blaming the path instead of removing the cloth. Relationships thrive when both people approach them as students, not finished masterpieces. A Stoic doesn't expect perfection, but they do demand effort, the kind that turns "I've always been bad at communication" into "I'm working on listening better." Here's where modern dating gets tangled. We've romanticized the idea of loving someone as they are, mistaking acceptance for resignation. The Stoics drew a sharper line. Love isn't about ignoring growth areas, it's about loving someone enough to encourage their evolution. Seneca wrote, "As long as you live, keep learning how to live." A partner who opts out of that journey isn't just standing still, they're dragging anchor in waters meant for sailing. Watch for the language of stagnation. Phrases like "I'm too old to change" or "people don't really change" aren't wisdom, they're surrender notes. Contrast this with the Stoic embrace of discomfort as the price of progress. Musonius Rufus taught that hardship is the whetstone of character. Just as steel is strengthened by fire, so too is virtue fortified by challenges. Someone allergic to self-improvement isn't avoiding effort, they're forfeiting depth. You'll notice it when conversations loop back to the same complaints without solutions, or when they deflect accountability with "you knew what you signed up for." The irony: stagnant partners often mistake their rigidity for strength. They'll call themselves set in their ways, as if it were a virtue rather than a limitation. But Stoicism measures strength by adaptability. The willow that bends in the storm outlasts the oak that snaps. Marcus Aurelius scribbled reminders to himself about the necessity of change. Adaptability is the measure of intelligence. A relationship with someone unwilling to grow is like grafting a living branch to dead wood. Eventually, one withers. The Stoic alternative: seek someone who approaches life like Epictetus' ideal student, hungry for correction, humble in ignorance, relentless in practice. They might not have all the answers, but they'll light up when discussing books that changed them, or mention how therapy reshaped their perspectives. These aren't just interests, they are evidence of a soul in motion. Because the truth Stoics grasp is this: love isn't about finding a finished person. It's about choosing someone whose growth direction aligns with yours, so you don't just share a life, you build one together. Negativity clings like smoke. It seeps into everything, staining even bright moments with doubt. This 11th red flag isn't just about the occasional bad day. It's a pattern of seeing the world through a lens of perpetual lack. Stoicism offers a radical alternative: amor fati, the love of fate. Seneca called it the art of turning obstacles into fuel, a mindset that doesn't ignore life's hardships but alchemizes them. Picture dating someone who meets every opportunity with "that'll never work," or recounts every memory with a grievance at its center. Their negativity isn't realism, it's a refusal to engage with life's inherent duality. The Stoic distinction here is crucial: acceptance isn't resignation. When Seneca wrote, "The willing are led by fate, the reluctant dragged," he wasn't advocating blind optimism. He was outlining a disciplined practice of finding agency in adversity. A partner stuck in negativity bias doesn't just complain, they reinforce their own helplessness. You'll hear it in their language: nothing good ever happens to me, people always disappoint. These aren't observations, they're self-fulfilling prophecies. Stoicism, by contrast, teaches that while we can't control events, we govern their meaning. A relationship with someone who habitually assigns bleak interpretations becomes an emotional tax. You'll exhaust yourself trying to prove that joy is possible. Consider how this plays out in small moments. A delayed flight isn't just an inconvenience to the negative partner, it's proof the universe is against them. A thoughtful gesture from you doesn't spark gratitude, it's weighed against the one time you forgot their favorite snack. Marcus Aurelius warned against this distortion in his Meditations. The universe is change, life is opinion. Pessimists don't experience a different reality, they insist on a narrower interpretation of it. The irony, chronic negativity often masquerades as wisdom. "I'm just being realistic," they'll say, as if cynicism were a superpower. But Stoicism reveals the flaw in that logic. True realism acknowledges both light and shadow. Seneca cultivated friendships with people who sharpened his thinking yet buoyed his spirit, those who could dispute without rancor. A partner who dwells in the negative isn't preparing for the worst, they're missing the present. The antidote lies in prosauche, the Stoic practice of attention. Instead of fixating on what's lacking, a Stoic-trained mind notices what's actionable. Imagine two responses to a job rejection. "Of course I didn't get it, I never get breaks," versus "what feedback can I take from this?" The first reinforces victimhood, the second, agency. Relationships thrive when both people can face setbacks without collapsing into them. Negativity isn't harmless, it's a slow leak in the shared emotional oxygen of a relationship. Seneca wrote letters to Lucilius urging him to avoid the masses, not out of elitism, but because despair is contagious. A partner who consistently amplifies the negative isn't just sharing feelings, they're recruiting you into their worldview. The Stoic alternative: seek someone who meets life as Marcus Aurelius did. The impediment becomes the way, not because they're naive, but because they've chosen to find the leverage in every situation. That's the difference between draining a relationship and fortifying it. Stoic compassion isn't the sentimental warmth of Hallmark cards, it's an unshakable recognition of shared humanity, a principle Marcus Aurelius called the bond that knits us together. When a date glances past a homeless person without flinching, or mocks a colleague's struggles as weakness, they're not just being insensitive, they're failing Stoicism's most fundamental test. Hierocles, the lesser-known Stoic thinker, mapped this in his circles of concern, envisioning empathy as concentric rings, self at the center, then family, community, and ultimately all humankind. The practice: draw those circles inward, treat strangers as friends, friends as family. A partner who can't extend concern beyond their inner ring hasn't just missed a lesson in kindness, they've misunderstood the Stoic project entirely. Coldness under the guise of rationality is one of the most dangerous misconceptions about Stoicism. Epictetus taught his students to distinguish between controlling emotions and erasing them. Picture someone who dismisses a grieving friend with "death happens, why dwell on it?" That's not Stoic detachment, it's emotional illiteracy. Seneca's letters to Lucilius overflow with tenderness, consoling bereaved mothers, urging friends to feel deeply without being ruled by passion. The red flag here isn't just a lack of empathy, it's the arrogance of those who mistake indifference for strength. Hierocles' model reveals the hypocrisy in selective compassion. Imagine a partner who dotes on their dog but sneers at refugees, or donates to charity galas yet ignores their siblings' depression. These aren't inconsistencies, they're failures of moral imagination. Stoic empathy isn't about feeling everyone's pain, it's about recognizing their inherent worth. Marcus Aurelius meditated daily on interconnectedness. What brings no benefit to the hive brings none to the bee. A relationship with someone blind to this truth becomes an island of privilege, disconnected from the wider human experience. The modern twist, empathy fatigue, the performative exhaustion of caring too much. Some wear it as a badge, sighing, "I can't handle others' problems right now," while scrolling past suffering. Stoicism offers an antidote, structured compassion. Just as hierarchical circles guide concern outward, Stoic journaling turns empathy into habit, reflecting each night on where you withheld understanding, where you could have listened better. A partner resistant to this practice isn't protecting their peace, they're refusing growth. The litmus test lies in mundane moments. Watch how they treat waitstaff, customer service reps, strangers in distress. Do they default to contempt? They're just lazy, or curiosity? What hardship led them here? Stoics choose the latter not out of naivety, but because, as Marcus Aurelius wrote, to persecute another is to persecute yourself. A partner incapable of this sees people as obstacles or utilities, not fellow travelers, and that's a red flag no amount of personal loyalty can override. Because love without empathy isn't love, it's attachment, a weaker and far more fragile thing. Impulsivity might masquerade as spontaneity, but Stoics recognize it for what it truly is, a surrender to chaos. Epictetus, who famously taught from a wooden stool in Athens, drew a stark line between freedom and recklessness. No man is free who is not master of himself. Picture someone who swipes their credit card on a luxury vacation they can't afford, then shrugs with "you only live once," or the partner who abruptly quits their job, moves cities, or picks fights, all under the banner of following their gut. These aren't acts of liberation, they're confessions of inner turbulence. Stoicism prizes prosauche, the discipline of mindful attention, precisely because unexamined impulses are the wrecking balls of rational life. The red flag here isn't occasional indulgence, it's a pattern of behavior untethered from consequence. Ancient Stoics compared impulsive people to boats without rudders, drifting wherever the current takes them. Modern psychology echoes this. Impulsivity correlates with emotional dysregulation, not enlightenment. When a date brags about maxing out 3 credit cards on designer clothes or jokes about their 3-day marriage in Vegas, they're not sharing adventures, they're revealing an inability to pause between desire and action. Epictetus warned that such people become slaves to their own whims. If you want to be steady, let reason hold the reins. But here's where Stoic wisdom cuts deeper. Impulsivity often disguises itself as passion, the lover who declares undying devotion on the second date, the partner who buys a puppy because it looked sad. These gestures seem romantic, but they lack the scaffolding of deliberate choice. Seneca cautioned against mistaking intensity for sincerity. True love is measured not in outbursts but in constancy. A Stoic watches for this distinction, not to curb joy, but to discern between what's fleeting and what's forged. The antidote, premeditatio malorum, the Stoic practice of visualizing consequences before acting. Imagine 2 responses to a sudden windfall. One person immediately books a sports car, the other sits with the money for a week, weighing investments against experiences. The first is ruled by impulse, the second by prosauche. Relationships thrive when both partners exercise this pause, when "let's think it through" outweighs "let's just do it." And here's the irony. Impulsive partners often pride themselves on being free spirits, but Stoicism redefines freedom. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events." Real freedom isn't acting on every urge, it's choosing which urges deserve your allegiance. A partner who can't master this will turn your shared life into a series of emergencies, financial, emotional, logistical. You'll become the cleanup crew for chaos you didn't create. The Stoic alternative: seek someone whose spontaneity has roots. Maybe they surprise you with concert tickets, but only after ensuring bills are paid. Or they propose a road trip, but with a map and a return date. These aren't contradictions, they're proof of a mind that weighs delight against duty. Because in the end, love isn't built on grand gestures, it's built on countless small choices to act with intention, not impulse. There's a fine line between leaning on someone and collapsing into them, and Stoicism draws that line with unflinching clarity. Musonius Rufus, the philosopher who taught Epictetus, framed self-sufficiency not as isolation, but as the foundation of healthy interdependence. We were born for cooperation, like hands working together. But cooperation isn't the same as codependence. Picture a partner who panics if you don't text back within an hour, or who expects you to regulate their moods like an emotional thermostat. That's not love, it's an unmet need disguised as attachment, and it suffocates the very growth Stoics consider sacred. Ancient Stoics distinguished between needing others and choosing them. Seneca wrote letters to Lucilius celebrating friendship while warning against enmeshment. Hold your own good as your master good, but regard theirs as equal to yours. A clingy partner inverts this balance. Their happiness becomes your obligation, their emptiness your fault. You'll recognize it in small ways: the guilt trips when you spend time with friends, the silent treatments when you're engrossed in work. These aren't bids for connection, they're power outages in someone's ability to self-source. Musonius Rufus offered a litmus test: can this person endure solitude without unraveling? Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort fasting, sleeping on hard beds not as punishment, but to prove they could thrive with or without externals. A partner who hasn't cultivated this inner resilience will treat relationships like life support, mistaking dependency for devotion. The red flag isn't vulnerability, it's the inability to function when the other person isn't actively tending to them. Modern psychology echoes this dichotomy. Secure attachment fosters mutual growth. Anxious attachment breeds emotional hostage-taking. Imagine two responses to a partner's weekend trip. One says, "I'll miss you, but have fun." The other bombards them with, "You don't care about me," texts by nightfall. Stoicism predicts the trajectory of these dynamics with eerie accuracy. A person who can't self-soothe will inevitably outsource that labor to you, draining the relationship of its reciprocity. The Stoic remedy, autarkeia, the art of contentment within oneself. This isn't emotional coldness, it's the opposite. Only when both partners stand firm in their own wholeness can they offer support without sacrificing sovereignty. Marcus Aurelius modeled this in his marriage to Faustina, loving deeply while maintaining separate disciplines, separate minds. Contrast that with relationships where we eclipses I, where hobbies and opinions merge until individuality dissolves. Here's the paradox Stoics understand: true connection requires two complete people, not two halves seeking completion. Musonius Rufus taught that dependence corrupts even friendship, let alone romance. A partner who expects you to fill their voids will eventually resent you for failing because no one can animate another's soul for them. The healthier alternative. Seek someone who comes to you not from lack but from abundance. Not because they need you to breathe, but because they choose you to share the air. The way someone treats a waiter or a stranger when they think no one's watching speaks volumes about their character, more than any grand gesture ever could. Marcus Aurelius, the emperor who scrubbed his own floors and ate simple meals, wrote that true humility lies in recognizing what we are made for, not domination but cooperation. Stoics pay close attention to how a date interacts with those who can't benefit them: the cashier, the janitor, the customer service rep. It's easy to turn on charm for someone you're trying to impress. The real test is how you treat people when there's nothing to gain. Watch for the subtle signs: the eye roll when the barista mispronounces their order, the snap of fingers to summon a server, the exaggerated sigh at a delayed subway agent. These aren't just bad manners, they're windows into entitlement. Epictetus, who endured slavery before teaching philosophy, framed humility as armor against false superiority. If someone speaks badly of you, that's their problem. Your only concern is not to deserve those words. A person who demeans service workers isn't just being rude, they're failing Stoicism's litmus test for inner nobility. Consider the contrast. A Stoic-minded partner might chat with the taxi driver about their day, leave an encouraging note for the housekeeping staff, or defend a retail worker unfairly blamed for a policy. These acts don't stem from performative kindness but from a grounded understanding, as Marcus Aurelius wrote that what injures the hive injures the bee. Disrespect for others isn't just an interpersonal flaw, it's a fracture in worldview, a refusal to see shared humanity. The red flag deepens when disrespect masquerades as humor. The date who mocks someone's accent as a joke or laughs at a homeless person's misfortune isn't just edgy, they're revealing a soul untempered by compassion. Seneca warned that cruelty delights in belittling others because it feigns strength through others' weakness. Stoics spot this instantly because they practice the opposite, finding dignity in every interaction, whether with a CEO or a street sweeper. Here's the Stoic twist: humility isn't self-effacement, it's accurate self-assessment. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he was a little soul carrying a corpse, a blunt equalizer against pride. A partner who treats lesser roles with contempt hasn't grasped this truth. They'll eventually turn that same condescension toward you when you disappoint them, or worse, expect you to join in their scorn to prove your loyalty. The ultimate test: observe how they speak about people not present. Do they trash talk exes, ridicule colleagues, or dismiss entire groups with stereotypes? Stoicism teaches that character is consistent. Someone who gossips with you will gossip about you. As Epictetus quipped, if you wouldn't say it in front of them, don't say it at all. Disrespect isn't a mood, it's a habit, and habits over time become the fabric of relationships. The Stoic alternative is simple but radical. Seek someone who treats the invisible as if they matter because to them they do. Not out of pity, but because they've internalized hierarchical circles of concern, stretching empathy outward like ripples in a pond. That's the mark of a person who doesn't just practice virtue when convenient, but lives it in the quiet corners where character shows its truest colors. Inconsistency isn't just frustrating, it's corrosive. A Stoic man understands this deeply because trust isn't built on grand promises. It's forged in the small, daily acts of showing up as you say you will. Seneca's letters hammer this point relentlessly. A good character is the only guarantee of everlasting, carefree happiness. But what happens when someone's actions swing like a pendulum, affectionate one day, distant the next, leaving you scrambling to decode their shifting energy? That's not spontaneity, it's emotional whiplash disguised as freedom. Consider Seneca's warning about the unreliable friend. You will never find a grateful person who is consistent in anything except ingratitude. He wasn't just critiquing flakiness, he was exposing a fracture in moral fiber. Stoicism elevates constancy because it mirrors nature's rhythms. The sun doesn't rise brilliantly one morning and ghost you the next. When a partner's attention oscillates unpredictably, they're not just being busy or independent, they're revealing an unsettled core, a lack of eustathia, the Stoic virtue of stability. Here's the subtle damage inconsistency inflicts. It trains you to distrust your own perceptions. You start rationalizing their absences, maybe they're stressed, or over-celebrating their crumbs of attention. Ancient Stoics called this doxa, the realm of unstable opinions where truth bends to whim. A relationship shouldn't feel like gambling. You shouldn't need to win basic reliability. Marcus Aurelius modeled the alternative in his marriage, writing, "Let every action be done as if it were your last, not melodramatically but with the weight of full presence." Watch for the patterns. Do they cancel plans last minute with vague excuses, then reappear with extravagant gestures? Do they text incessantly for weeks, only to vanish without explanation? These aren't just logistical hiccups, they're rehearsals for deeper betrayals. Seneca saw reliability as the bedrock of all virtues. What good is a noble birth if character is ignoble? A partner who's erratic with time will eventually be erratic with loyalty, with honesty, with emotional labor. The Stoic antidote, homologia, living in agreement with oneself. It's the practice of aligning words, actions, and principles so tightly that others never doubt where you stand. Imagine two types of partners. One surprises you with tickets to Paris but forgets your birthday. The other may not orchestrate grand gestures, but they remember your coffee order, return calls when promised, and show up literally and emotionally when it matters. The Stoic chooses the latter every time because love isn't measured in peaks and valleys, but in the steady ground between them. Here's the paradox: consistency doesn't mean rigidity. A Stoic partner can adapt to change. They just do it transparently. If they need space, they say so. If priorities shift, they communicate. What they don't do is leave you stranded in the ambiguity of their moods. Because as Seneca wrote, life is long enough if well ordered. Relationships thrive on that order, the kind that lets love grow roots instead of forever bracing for the next storm. A partner who dodges responsibility isn't just forgetful, they're failing one of Stoicism's most sacred tests. Epictetus, who began life as a slave, understood duty not as a burden but as the very framework of freedom. First, tell yourself what kind of person you want to be, then do what you have to do. Picture someone who chronically forgets to pay their share of rent or leaves you to handle all the household chores with a breezy, "I'm just not good at adulting." These aren't quirky flaws, they're breaches of trust disguised as helplessness. Stoics measure character not by intentions, but by the weight of small, unglamorous obligations. When someone shrugs off commitments, they're not just being careless, they're revealing how lightly they take their word. The red flag here isn't occasional slip-ups, it's a pattern of strategic avoidance. Epictetus framed responsibility as interconnected strands. You are a citizen of the world and a part of it, not some subordinate, isolated clause. A partner who shirks chores, flakes on plans, or leaves you to manage shared duties alone isn't just inconveniencing you, they're fracturing the reciprocity that makes relationships viable. Watch how they handle mundane commitments. Do they follow through on picking up groceries as reliably as they show up for date night? Stoicism teaches that love isn't built on grand gestures, but on the quiet integrity of showing up for the boring, the tedious, the uncelebrated work. Epictetus' discourses cut to the heart of this evasion. If you want to be trusted, be trustworthy. Responsibility avoidance often masks a deeper fear, the terror of being held accountable. The partner who just doesn't do conflict when bills are overdue, or who blames traffic for every tardiness rather than leaving earlier, isn't avoiding chores. They're dodging the mirror that responsibility holds up to their character. Stoics don't tolerate this not because they're rigid, but because they know a person unwilling to carry their share in peacetime will abandon you in battle. But here's the twist: modern dating misses responsibility isn't oppression. The Stoic concept of kathakonta, appropriate actions, frames duty as liberation. When both partners honor their roles, whether it's taking out the trash or keeping difficult promises, they create something rare, a bond where trust isn't a leap of faith, but a natural outcome of countless small dependabilities. Contrast that with relationships where one person becomes the perpetual project manager, delegating tasks like a CEO to a reluctant intern. That imbalance doesn't just breed resentment, it starves intimacy of its oxygen. The Stoic alternative: seek someone who meets obligations not out of guilt but out of self-respect, who returns borrowed books unprompted, shows up early to pick you up from the airport, and remembers without reminders to feed the cat. These aren't minor details, they're the daily rehearsals for life's bigger stages. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, waste no more time arguing what a good person should be. Be one. A partner who lives that truth doesn't just share your life, they honor it. Charm can be the most seductive mask. It sparkles with wit, disarms with smiles, and makes even emptiness feel like a lure. But Stoicism, ever the unmasker of illusions, draws a stark line between charm that delights and charm that deceives. Seneca, who navigated the treacherous courts of Nero, wrote that flattery is friendship's counterfeit, a warning born from watching smooth talkers rise like foam, flashy, fleeting, and ultimately hollow. This 18th red flag isn't about charisma itself. Stoics appreciate intelligence and humor, but about charisma unmoored from character. Picture the date who peppers you with perfectly timed compliments but blanks when conversation turns to your values, or the partner whose magnetism evaporates the moment you need emotional depth. These aren't just social butterflies, they're emotional holograms, dazzling surfaces with nothing beneath. The Stoic distinction hinges on intention. Seneca's letters dissect this ruthlessly. The words of those who please the crowd must be distrusted. Real connection requires friction, the willingness to occasionally disagree, to sit in silence, to reveal unpolished edges. Superficial charm avoids all this, mistaking agreeableness for intimacy. You'll recognize it in conversations that glide endlessly over pleasantries but shy from vulnerability, or in partners who mirror your opinions flawlessly yet never offer original thoughts. Like gilded cutlery at a fast food joint, their brilliance exists to distract from the lack of nourishment. Modern dating worships at this altar. We confuse eloquence with wisdom, confidence with competence. A Stoic observes instead the cracks in the veneer, how the life of the party deflates when the party ends, or how the master storyteller never lets others hold the mic. Epictetus, who prized substance above style, asked his students, "If someone praised your cloak, would you think them wise?" The same applies to empty charm. If admiration is their currency, their values are bankrupt. But here's where Stoic wisdom cuts deepest. Superficial charm isn't harmless. It's a strategic diversion, often compensating for deficits elsewhere: intellectual laziness, emotional immaturity, or worse. Seneca called such people stage actors of virtue, performing decency without living it. Watch how they treat those who can't advance their social capital: the elderly neighbor, the shy co-worker. Charm that's selectively deployed isn't charm at all, it's social engineering. The antidote: seek the quiet magnetism of gravitas, the Stoic virtue of weightiness. It's the partner who listens more than they monologue, who values insight over impressions, whose presence feels like oak, not glitter. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. That's the litmus test. Does their charm illuminate their character or replace it? Because in the end, relationships built on sparkle dissolve in the first rain. Entitlement is the unspoken belief that the world owes you, a mindset Stoicism dismantles with surgical precision. Marcus Aurelius, who ruled an empire yet slept on a camp bed, wrote that we should accept humbly, let go easily, a radical counter to modern dating's culture of expectation. Picture someone who complains about only getting bouquet flowers instead of jewelry, or who sulks when their birthday celebration isn't Instagram-worthy. These aren't preferences, they're distortions of reality, where gratitude is replaced with a ledger of imagined debts. Stoics recognize this instantly because they train in amor fati, the love of fate, which teaches that life is neither fair nor unfair, it simply is. A partner who hasn't grasped this will treat relationships like vending machines, inserting kindness coins and shaking the machine when their desired treat doesn't drop. Notice how entitlement metastasizes in small moments. The date who expects you to cover the bill every time because tradition, or the partner who demands constant reassurance but rarely offers it. These behaviors stem from the same root, a refusal to accept that love, like life, is a gift, not an entitlement. Marcus Aurelius meditated daily on this truth, reminding himself that you exist as a part of a greater whole, a perspective that shrinks petty demands to irrelevance. The entitled partner doesn't just want more, they feel owed more, transforming relationships into transactional battlegrounds where you're forever in arrears. Here's where Stoic gratitude diverges sharply. Seneca wrote letters thanking friends for criticism, not just praise, because he valued growth over ego stroking. An entitled person, by contrast, treats even basic courtesies as their due while resenting any inconvenience. You'll recognize it in their language. "You should have known I'd want this," or "I deserve someone who treats me better," phrases that mistake partnership for servitude. The Stoic response, as Epictetus taught, "Don't seek for events to happen as you wish, but wish for them to happen as they do." This isn't passivity. It's the recognition that joy comes from appreciating what is, not lamenting what isn't. The irony: entitlement often disguises itself as high standards. "I know my worth" becomes code for "I'll punish you for falling short." Marcus Aurelius warned against this delusion. The universe is change, life is opinion. A partner who interprets every unmet expectation as a personal slight hasn't just set boundaries, they've built a throne on shifting sand, forever demanding the world adjust to their whims. The Stoic alternative is simpler and far more liberating. Seek someone who meets life with open hands, not clenched fists, who sees your efforts not as obligations fulfilled, but as gifts freely given. Because entitlement poisons love with scorekeeping, while gratitude transforms even ordinary moments into offerings. Addiction isn't just a personal struggle, it's a surrender of agency, and Stoicism frames this with unflinching clarity. Musonius Rufus, the Stoic teacher who trained Epictetus, called temperance the foundation of all virtues, not because pleasure was evil, but because unmastered desires enslaved. Picture someone who needs 3 glasses of wine to unwind every night, or whose phone addiction eclipses real conversation. These aren't just habits, they're confessions of inner fragility, proof that something external has taken the reins. Stoics don't judge the struggle, they judge the refusal to confront it. When a partner laughs off their compulsive shopping as retail therapy, or dismisses their gaming binges as just blowing off steam, they're not owning their behavior, they're outsourcing their peace to substances or screens. Musonius Rufus drilled this lesson into his students. True freedom lies in ruling your appetites, not being ruled by them. He compared uncontrolled cravings to a chariot dragged by runaway horses. You might feel in motion, but you're not steering. Modern neuroscience echoes this. Addiction rewires the brain to prioritize short-term relief over long-term well-being. A Stoic-minded partner recognizes this not as moral failure, but as a call to arms. They'll say, "I'm working on cutting back," not, "It's not a big deal." The red flag isn't the presence of a vice, it's the absence of a fight. Here's where Stoic temperance diverges from Puritan denial. The goal isn't to eradicate pleasure, but to engage with it consciously. Seneca, who famously enjoyed wealth without worshipping it, wrote, "It is not the man who has too little, but the man who craves more that is poor." A partner who can't enjoy a drink without finishing the bottle, or who turns every hobby into obsession, hasn't just lost balance, they've lost sovereignty. Watch for the language of compulsion. "I have to check my likes," or "I can't sleep without scrolling." These aren't figures of speech, they're windows into a mind that's forgotten its own power. The deeper cost: addictive behaviors don't exist in isolation. They seep into relationships demanding accommodations. Your patience with their hangovers, your silence about their spending, your loneliness while they zone out. Epictetus, who championed self-ownership, warned that attachments to externals inevitably compromise integrity. What you wish to be yours must first be yours. A partner who hasn't confronted their dependencies will eventually ask you to conspire in their denial, to pretend the elephant isn't in the room, the Stoic alternative. Seek someone whose habits reflect eudaimonia flourishing, not escape. Maybe they savor a single whiskey while discussing philosophy, or set screen limits to protect presence. These choices aren't restrictive, they're liberating. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this and you will find strength." A relationship with someone who embodies that truth isn't just easier, it's freer. Because love shouldn't compete with a bottle, a bet, or a feed. It should be the thing that makes them obsolete. A mind that stops questioning stops growing, and Stoicism considers that stagnation a form of living death. Seneca, who amassed one of antiquity's greatest libraries, wrote letters brimming with discoveries from his daily reading, calling books nourishment for the soul. Picture dating someone whose eyes glaze over when you mention a documentary, who dismisses unfamiliar ideas with sounds boring, or whose conversational range ends at gossip and small talk. These aren't just personality quirks, they're warnings of intellectual atrophy, a refusal to engage with the world's depth. Stoic men spot this instantly because they know curiosity isn't just a trait, it's the muscle that flexes wisdom. Seneca's letters reveal why this matters. He didn't read to impress, he read to renew himself, filling scrolls with notes and debates as if his mind were a forge that needed constant fueling. Contrast that with a partner who hasn't picked up a book since school, who mistakes cynicism for critical thinking, or who reduces every complex issue to lazy cliches. The red flag isn't a lack of knowledge, it's indifference to gaining any. As Seneca warned, no one is wise by accident. A relationship with someone intellectually disengaged isn't just dull, it's a slow suffocation of potential. You'll feel your own curiosity wither as their apathy becomes the norm until "why bother" replaces "what if." But here's the nuance modern dating misses. Curiosity isn't about trivia or credentials. The Stoics revered autodidact slaves like Epictetus who taught themselves philosophy. What matters isn't formal education but the restless urge to understand. Imagine two partners, one with a PhD who scoffs at new perspectives, the other a high school dropout who devours podcasts on astrophysics and asks thoughtful questions. The Stoic chooses the latter every time. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the object of life is not to be on the side of the majority, but to escape finding oneself in the ranks of the insane. A partner who stops learning is, in a sense, sleepwalking, mistaking the familiar for the true. Watch for the subtle signs. Do they change the subject when you mention an article that challenged you? Do they dismiss entire genres, history, science, art as not their thing? Stoicism teaches that growth requires friction, the discomfort of stretching beyond comfort zones. A partner allergic to that stretch will resist your evolution too, framing your interests as pretentious or too deep. Seneca saw this as tragic. They lose the day in waiting for the night and the night in fearing the dawn. A life and love without curiosity is just marking time until the end. The antidote: seek someone whose eyes light up at a question they can't answer, who finds wonder in the mundane, who understands that wisdom, like love, isn't a destination but a daily practice. Not because they're encyclopedias, but because they're explorers. As Seneca reminded Lucilius, as long as you live, keep learning how to live. A partner who embodies that isn't just interesting, they're alive. And that's the kind of energy that makes love not just endure but expand. Passive aggressiveness is the poison of clarity, a slow, insidious erosion of trust that Stoicism refuses to tolerate. Epictetus, who championed radical honesty, dismissed veiled communication as cowardice in disguise. If you wish to speak, speak plainly. If you wish to be heard, say what you mean. Imagine a partner who says, "Fine, do whatever you want," when they're clearly upset, or jokingly needles your insecurities only to retreat behind, "I was just kidding." These aren't harmless quirks, they're emotional guerrilla tactics, avoiding accountability while still inflicting damage. Stoics recognize this instantly because their entire philosophy hinges on alignment between thought, word, and action. A passive-aggressive person fractures that triad, leaving you to decode their resentment like an archaeologist piecing together broken pottery. The danger lies in its ambiguity. Unlike outright hostility, which at least offers a clear target, passive aggressiveness thrives in the shadows of implication. It's the sigh when you mention your friends, the forgotten anniversary masked as busyness, the backhanded compliment, "You're so brave for wearing that." Epictetus framed directness as a moral obligation. Don't explain your philosophy, embody it. A partner who communicates through hints and subtext isn't just bad at expressing needs, they're demanding you absorb their emotional labor. You'll find yourself perpetually braced for the next indirect jab, walking on eggshells to avoid triggering their unspoken grievances. Stoicism contrasts this with parrhesia, fearless speech. The ancient Stoics practiced confronting discomfort head-on, not because they lacked subtlety, but because they valued resolution over performance. Picture two responses to disappointment. One partner says, "I felt hurt when you cancelled our plans," while the other mutters, "Must be nice to have so many better things to do." The first fosters repair, the second breeds resentment. Marcus Aurelius meditated on this distinction. The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. Passive aggressiveness stains relationships with unresolved tension, layer by layer, until the original connection is buried beneath unspoken grudges. Here's the paradox passive-aggressive people miss. Indirectness doesn't protect harmony, it sabotages it. Seneca wrote that suppressed emotions always find expression, like rivers forced underground only to resurface as polluted springs. A partner who can't voice dissatisfaction directly will leak it sideways through procrastination on shared tasks, sudden forgetfulness, or weaponized silence. The Stoic alternative is simple but demanding. Speak with candor but without cruelty. Name your feelings without making them someone else's fault. As Epictetus taught, first say to yourself what you would be and then act accordingly. A relationship grounded in that principle doesn't just avoid passive aggressiveness, it renders it obsolete. The telltale sign: watch how they handle minor conflicts. Do they address spills or late arrivals with grace, or do they leave sticky notes with sarcastic reminders? Stoicism doesn't expect perfection, but it does demand awareness. A partner committed to growth might occasionally lapse into indirectness, but they'll course correct when called out, not double down with "you're too sensitive." The red flag isn't a single moment of frustration. It's the entrenched pattern of avoiding hard conversations while still punishing you for not reading their mind. In the end, passive aggressiveness isn't just a communication flaw, it's a failure of courage. The Stoics reserved their harshest criticism not for those who erred openly, but for those who cloaked their weaknesses in evasion. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is to be unlike him who performed the injury." Choosing directness isn't merely efficient, it's an act of respect for yourself, for your partner, and for the integrity of the bond you're building together. Unresolved past trauma doesn't just linger, it hijacks the present, and Stoicism draws a hard line between honoring pain and being ruled by it. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the impediment becomes the way, but that transformation requires something many avoid: the deliberate, often messy work of healing. Picture dating someone who bristles at innocuous comments because they remind them of their ex, or who shuts down during minor conflicts, replaying old betrayals like a broken record. These aren't just emotional scars, they're open wounds shaping current behavior, and Stoicism identifies this as a red flag not out of cruelty, but because unprocessed trauma violates the core tenet of the dichotomy of control, the distinction between what we can influence and what we can't. The past is fixed, our relationship to it isn't. A partner trapped in yesterday's pain hasn't just failed to move on, they've handed their present to ghosts. Stoic compassion here is nuanced. Epictetus, who endured slavery and physical abuse, never dismissed suffering as trivial. His famous question, "Is this within my control?" Wasn't a dismissal of pain, but a roadmap through it. Modern therapy aligns strikingly with this principle. Cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, for example, echoes Stoicism by teaching clients to separate events from their interpretations. A partner who refuses this work, who insists their trauma, excuses perpetual mistrust or emotional withdrawal, isn't honoring their history. they're allowing it to colonize the present. Seneca's letters to Lucilius reveal why this matters. We suffer more in imagination than in reality. Unhealed trauma keeps imagination on a loop, projecting past harm onto current relationships until every partner becomes a stand-in for old villains. The red flag isn't the trauma itself, it's the resistance to addressing it. Ancient Stoics lacked our clinical vocabulary, but their tools were remarkably similar. Journaling, Marcus Aurelius meditations, challenging irrational beliefs, Epictetus disruptions, and voluntary discomfort to build resilience, Musonius Rufus ascetic drills. Today, therapy offers structured versions of these practices, yet some dismiss it as weakness or navel-gazing. That's not strength, it's avoidance masquerading as Stoicism lowercase s. A Stoic partner understands that true courage isn't ignoring wounds, it's stitching them. They might say, "I'm triggered by raised voices because of my dad's anger, so I'm learning to pause before reacting, acknowledging the past while reclaiming agency." The danger of unprocessed trauma isn't just individual, it's relational. Hierarchical circles of concern shrink inward when pain goes unaddressed. The traumatized partner becomes the sole focus, their needs eclipsing shared ground. Love under these conditions isn't a partnership, it's caretaking. Marcus Aurelius warned against confusing the branch for the tree, a metaphor painfully apt here. Trauma becomes the entire relationship, its shadows obscuring everything else. Contrast this with a partner who says, "My trust was broken before, but I'm working to not punish you for others' mistakes." That's the Stoic balance, honoring the past without letting it dictate the future. Here's the paradox: trauma demands witness, but healing demands release. Stoicism, often misread as emotionless, actually provides the framework for both. Seneca consoled Marcia after her son's death not by urging her to get over it, but by guiding her to integrate grief without being consumed. Similarly, a partner healing from betrayal might need to voice their fears, but Stoicism asks, are those fears informing your present or distorting it? The line between caution and projection blurs when trauma goes unexamined. The Stoic alternative seeks someone who treats their past as Seneca treated adversity, as raw material for growth. They'll say, "I was hurt, but I refuse to let that define how I love now." Not because they've erased the pain, but because they've chosen to forge meaning from it. As Epictetus taught, it's not what happens to you, but how you come back from it that defines you. That's the litmus test. Does their trauma make them more compassionate or just more guarded? One builds bridges, the other fortresses, and love can't thrive behind walls. Controlling behavior doesn't just strain relationships, it suffocates them, and Stoicism recognizes this as one of the gravest betrayals of its core principle, freedom. Seneca, who wrote extensively on friendship and love, offered a piercing insight in his letters. If you wish to be loved, love without chains. Imagine a partner who monitors your texts, questions your friendships, or maps your schedule like a warden. These aren't signs of devotion, but of fear wearing the mask of care. Stoic philosophy draws a stark distinction between protection and prison. A relationship built on control isn't a bond. It's a transaction where one person's insecurity becomes the other's cage. The Stoic rejection of possessiveness isn't cold detachment, it's profound respect for individual sovereignty. Seneca compared controlling love to clutching water in your fist. The tighter you squeeze, the faster it slips away. Ancient Stoics practiced autarkeia, self-sufficiency, not to isolate themselves, but to ensure their connections were chosen, not compulsory. A controlling partner inverts this principle, mistaking proximity for intimacy and obedience for loyalty. You'll recognize it in small ways: the offhand, "Who were you with?" That's really a demand for justification, or the sulking when you prioritize time with family. These aren't just quirks, they're early warnings of a mindset that conflates love with ownership. Here's where Stoic wisdom dismantles modern myths. Society often romanticizes jealousy as passion. the partner who fights for you by interrogating your interactions or isolating you from distractions. Seneca dismissed this as emotional illiteracy. True love is neither servitude nor tyranny. Stoics measure love by its capacity to liberate, not confine. Picture two relationships, one where a partner insists on joint social media accounts to prove trust, another where they encourage solo travel to nurture independence. The first stems from fear, the second from faith in themselves and in the relationship's resilience. Marcus Aurelius framed this as an exercise in perspective. What injures the hive injures the bee. Controlling behavior doesn't just harm the controlled, it corrodes the controller's soul. Every demand for compliance is a confession of doubt in the relationship, in oneself, in the very possibility of free choice deepening love. Epictetus, enslaved before teaching philosophy, understood this viscerally. No man is free who cannot command himself. A partner who micromanages your movements hasn't just overstepped boundaries, they've revealed their own enslavement to fear. The antidote lies in sympatheia, the Stoic concept of interconnected independence. Imagine a relationship where both people orbit like planets, distinct yet gravitationally aligned, close enough to share warmth but never obstructing each other's light. Seneca described this balance in his letters to Lucilius. Hold your friend's soul in yours, but never his steps. Controlling partners reverse this, fixating on footsteps while neglecting souls. Watch for the language of possession, your mine versus I choose you daily. One assumes ownership, the other renewal. The ultimate test, observe how they handle your autonomy. Do they celebrate your solo achievements as shared victories, or resent them as distractions from their script? Stoicism teaches that love, like wisdom, can't be imposed, it must be invited. As Seneca wrote, a gift isn't precious unless it's freely given. Control doesn't secure love, it suffocates the very conditions that let it breathe. And no amount of vigilance can replace the trust it destroys. Disinterest in philosophy might seem like a harmless quirk until you realize Stoics view it as the ultimate relationship deal-breaker. Marcus Aurelius didn't just casually journal about virtue. He treated philosophy as oxygen, scribbling in meditations. Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. For the Stoic-minded, a partner who dismisses deep conversation with, I don't do deep stuff, isn't just avoiding abstract musings. They're rejecting the very framework that shapes love into something enduring. Philosophy, to a Stoic, isn't ivory tower speculation. It's the operating system for life, the difference between reacting to storms and navigating them. Shared values aren't just nice-to-haves, they're the bedrock of homologia, the Stoic principle of living in agreement. Picture dating someone who shrugs off ethics discussions with just be a good person, yet can't define what good means when their patience is tested. The disconnect here isn't intellectual, it's existential. Stoicism teaches that love without philosophical alignment is like building on sand. No amount of attraction can compensate for foundational cracks. When Epictetus said, first say what kind of person you want to be, then do what you have to do, he wasn't lecturing, he was outlining relational survival. A partner disinterested in examining their values is essentially flying blind, expecting you to be their moral GPS. But here's where modern dating misses the mark. Philosophy isn't about quoting Seneca over candlelit dinners. It's in the quiet choices, how someone handles an unfair critique at work, whether they return a lost wallet, if they argue to understand rather than win. Marcus Aurelius called this living philosophy, the art of weaving principles into daily fabric. A partner who rolls their eyes at big ideas but practices kindness instinctively might be philosophically aligned without knowing it. The red flag isn't ignorance of Stoic texts, it's contempt for the pursuit of wisdom itself. The irony, many avoid philosophy, assuming it requires dusty tomes or debate club precision. Yet Stoicism at its core is brutally practical. When your date says, why overthink it, just go with your gut, they're accidentally channeling Epictetus' warning. An untrained mind is a weapon turned against itself. Shared values aren't about reciting maxims, they're about recognizing that love thrives when both people are committed to a shared North Star, whether they call it philosophy or simply how we choose to live. The litmus test lies in curiosity, not credentials. A Stoic isn't looking for a fellow scholar, they're seeking someone who asks why as often as what. Someone who sees a disagreement not as a threat but as a chance to refine their thinking. As Marcus Aurelius wrote, the universe is change, life is opinion. A partner unwilling to examine their opinions isn't just disagreeing with you, they're resisting the very growth that keeps love alive. Because love without philosophical roots isn't love, it's attachment, a far weaker and more fragile thing. These 25 red flags aren't just a checklist, they're a mirror reflecting the core virtues Stoicism holds sacred: self-awareness, accountability, resilience, and above all, the courage to see reality without illusion. Every time a Stoic-minded man notices someone blaming the world instead of examining their own choices, or watches charm eclipse character, or spots the quiet erosion of boundaries, he's not just dodging bullets, he's honoring a 2000-year-old tradition of discerning what true strength looks like. Because Stoicism was never about suppressing emotion, it was about mastering attention, training yourself to spot the fissures in someone's foundation before you build a life atop them. What makes these insights timeless is how they invert modern dating's priorities. Society often glorifies chemistry over compatibility, passion over peace, grand gestures over quiet consistency. Stoicism recalibrates that compass, asking, does this person embody the four cardinal virtues: wisdom, justice, courage, and temperance, not just in their highlights but in their shadows? When they're stressed, do they default to blame or ownership? When hurt, do they seek repair or retaliation? These aren't theoretical questions, they're the hinges on which lasting love swings. But here's the invitation embedded in this list. It's not just about evaluating others, it's about auditing yourself. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be." Be one. Every red flag you've recognized in others is also a prompt to reflect. Where might you be falling short? Are there moments you've played the victim instead of the student, or prioritized comfort over character? Stoicism's gift is its insistence that growth is a two-way street. You can't demand virtues from others that you're unwilling to cultivate in yourself. So as we close, let's make this practical. Scroll back through these red flags and pinpoint the one that struck you deepest. Maybe it was the partner who weaponized vulnerability, or the one who mistook intensity for intimacy. Whatever it was, that resonance isn't accidental, it's your intuition aligning with ancient wisdom. Share it in the comments. Which red flag felt most revealing to you? And for those ready to go deeper, hit subscribe. We're just scratching the surface of how Stoicism can transform not just who you attract, but how you show up in every relationship. Because the ultimate Stoic love story isn't about finding perfection, it's about choosing a partner who, like you, is committed to the lifelong practice of becoming.